Good morning and welcome to this week's midweek meditation. Today we're taking a look at Psalm 111. Praise to the Eternal. I will thank him with all my heart in the presence of the right standing and with the assembly. The works of the Eternal are many and wondrous. As the first couple of verses from the Voice Bible. This psalm enumerates God's deeds and goodness. What does enumerate mean? It means to mention God's deeds and goodness one by one. Count your blessings, name them one by one, comes to mind. This psalm is written using the Hebrew alphabet. So, for instance, write the letters of our alphabet, A, B, C, D, E, all the way through Z. And then for each letter, starting with A, write something you're thankful for. Air to breathe. Ability to get up in the morning, walk, whatever it is. B, thankful for bread. Not breads and buns and loaves, but food for every day, the bread of life, Jesus himself. And continue all the way through the alphabet. That gives you an idea of how this psalm was written. There are two verses that stand out in this psalm to me. Verse 2, first of all, treasuring and desiring God's works. Great is God and greatly to be praised. Great are God's works, God's activity, God's product, the doings of God's providence. They are to be pondered, thought about. Pondered means to tread, frequent, follow, seek, ask, worship, to seek out. God's blessings and good works are the object of our meditation and inquiry. They are to be searched into and carefully studied as we take an interest in God and what God does. This is for all of us who delight in God. So do you take pleasure in God's good works? Do you take pleasure in God's blessings? Do you spend time reflecting upon those each and every day? What are God's blessings today? What is God doing in my life today? How is God caring for me, providing for me today? And my response then is to thank and praise God. The works of the Lord are to be sought out, to look for, we're to reflect upon them when we find them, and to seek to understand them, giving thanks for them. The second verse that stood out was verse 9, God's holy and awesome name. And we think about God being holy and awesome, but what about God's name? If God is holy and awesome, God's name is certainly holy and awesome and to be revered. God is holy and sacred, awesome, so we are to stand in fear and awe of God. To revere, it causes us to tremble, to shake, to be frightened. But usually when we think of God and God's name, the frightening part is the standing in awe of what God does. For instance, just yesterday, I went to the store with $60 to buy food for a family for Thanksgiving. And I spent $59.62. That was God awesomely working in that moment, in that situation. God, and therefore God's name, is intrinsically holy and therefore to be reverenced. The word reverend, as now used, gives us an imperfect concept of the original term. God is glorious in holiness. God is fearful in praises. God is the one doing the wonders, both in the way of judgment and the way of mercy, not me. John Wesley said of the word reverend, God is terrible to God's enemies, but respected in the eyes of God's people. God and God's name deserve our respect and our thanksgiving and our praise. The name of God is holy. It is God's nature. It appears in all of God's works. Such a glorious God is to be feared and gazed upon, related to with awesome reverence. God is an awesome God. Give thanks to God. Give praise to God. Learn to live in the reverent awareness of who God is, giving thanks for God's righteousness, mercy, compassion, love, grace, mercy, the covenant, God's rule that is trustworthy and fulfilled, and God's redemption, as the psalmist continues to write. Remember to be thankful to God for what God is doing. Peace and blessings.